Good evening, and welcome to tonight's ICA Forum. I'm Monica Garza, the Charlotte Wagner Director of Education. Today's program is a follow-up to an October 2019 forum organized in conjunction with Milwaukee County's then recent decision of declaring racism a public health threat. Since then, over 25 local and state leaders across the country have followed suit with similar declarations. We are honored to continue this important discussion with this panel of distinguished individuals who each have made significant contributions in each of their fields. They really need no introduction given their many highly recognized accomplishments, so I'll keep this brief for you. Our panelists include Dr. Kim Leary. Kim is an associate professor of psychology at the Harvard Medical School, McLean Hospital, associate professor at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, and Kim has also just recently joined the Urban Institute as senior vice president. We also have Dr. Carolyn Crockett. Dr. Crockett is the City of Boston's Chief of Equity, a recent cabinet appointment. Dr. Crockett's cabinet includes agencies such as the Human Rights Commission, Immigrant Advancement, and Women's Advancement. We also have O.J. Slaughter, activist, curator, director, and photographer. Their art centers on the liberation of all people, telling the history of now and preserving our future past, which is the backbone of O.J.'s work. Also here is Bill T. Jones, choreographer, dancer, theater director, and writer. Bill has received countless honors for his work over the years, ranging from a MacArthur Genius Award to Kennedy Center honors. He has also been recognized with a Tony and an Obie Award for his stage work. We also have Amanda Taffy, who is joining us as a discussant. Amanda is a former civil rights lawyer and current Doctor of Public Health student at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Amanda's current research is focused on the impact of COVID-19 on New York-based female artists and their practice. Tonight's moderator is Jeneé Osterheldt, culture columnist for the Boston Globe and panelist at the 2019 ICA Forum. Jeneé is also leading the newspaper's A Beautiful Resistance initiative, which you can learn more about on the Boston Globe website, and I hope to hear more about it tonight as well. We will first hear from Dr. Leary, but before I turn over the virtual mic to her, I would like to invite our audience to submit their questions during the presentation using the Q&A button. If time allows at the end of the program, we will be sure to address your questions. And now I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Leary.
So good evening, everyone. As a public health professional, as well as a healthcare professional, and based on our experience over these last months, of course, we appreciate that COVID-19 is an acute public health crisis that has resulted in unremitting stress of different kinds on most every constituency you can imagine. But it's also, of course, really critical to appreciate that this public health crisis has become an economic challenge. And Black and Brown people have been hardest hit by the stay-at-home orders and other public health measures that have indeed slowed the spread of COVID-19. But because of legacy occupational segregation, they also, members of Brown and Black communities, have been overrepresented in low-wage work and jobs that haven't enabled them to transition to remote work. And layoffs related to COVID-19 have been very likely to lead to housing instability for these groups. Concurrently, COVID-19 has, as we've learned over these months, it's exacerbated longstanding health disparities in communities of color. And Black and Brown people, again, have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 because of years of systemic racism and inequitable access to healthcare and other opportunities. And then in May, Black people, already traumatized by centuries of violence and brutality, hit a breaking point when George Floyd was killed on camera, and millions of allies joined them in protest. And just a few days ago, again, we had a similar circumstance with Walter Wallace in Philadelphia. And of course, all of these dynamics are playing out while our own democratic process and norms are being tested like never before. So this is one reason that we might think of COVID-19 as a set of concurrent, overlapping crises, a wicked problem, C.W. Churchman once called it, where the problem is one that the forces accelerate and affect one another. I think it's useful to examine why, as best we can determine now, George Floyd became an inflection point. Certainly, there are hundreds of people who've been received punitive policing or vigilante justice. But somehow with George Floyd, more Americans became willing to see themselves in a different light and to recognize that structural racism wasn't something that was in some other community, but it was in their community, my community, and it became something of a collective problem. My personal take on this is that Americans are moved to action by the particular on behalf of specific injustices, and especially those they can see. George Floyd's murder occurring on camera meant that for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, we watched a man suffocate to death. And possibly his death by suffocation at a time when we were all attuned to the horrors of the loss of breath with COVID-19 touched us more because it touched on a common vulnerability. So a lot has happened in these last months. And I wanted to say a little bit about my other area of specialty, which is mental health. You know, under ordinary conditions, stress and anxiety serve as signals. They tell you there's a danger and you take protective action and stress is reduced. But as I've just described, and I'm sure my colleagues will as well, COVID-19 has been a wicked problem because each protective action we take brings new stressors. And we know that over these last 8 months, there have been a rise in substance use, domestic violence, and presumed child endangerment. And all the things that make stress traumatic, that it's a negative experience, uncontrollable things are happening, there's a lot of ambiguity, and you have to continuously adapt, are exactly the experience we've had over these last 8 months with COVID-19. Stress is cumulative, and if you're already under pressure, its impact is disproportionate. And you might think of it as like a coffee table. You put too much on the coffee table and it will become overweighted. Racism is a specific stressor, and there's a large body of research that shows a link between racism and psychological distress, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, also depression among Black people. And in the current moment, what happened to George Floyd, what happened to Walter Wallace and so many others, has induced a kind of collective trauma, particularly among Black Americans, says my colleague, Dr. Anel Prim, who is the medical director of the Steve Fund, an organization that supports the mental health of young people of color. So as we think about this particular moment and the stresses that we know ourselves to be feeling, it's also important, I think, to recognize that that stress is different now, 8 months in, than it was at the outset. And because it shows no sign of easing anytime soon, the work ahead will continue to be much like it has been now, where we're using the very best of our innovation, but we're also operating under compromised conditions. So with that, let me turn the mic over to Dr. Crockett. Thank you.
Dr. Leary, thank you so much for opening up such a rich conversation, and many thanks to the ICA for bringing us all together to talk about such an important set of ideas. Racism, public health, and contemporary art may not seem connected at first blush, but we are here to show you otherwise, and look forward to a much richer dialogue as we move forward. So I'm Carolyn Crockett. I am the Chief of Equity for the City of Boston, and really thrilled to be here. Mayor Walsh is one of these mayors from across the country that has called out racism as a public health crisis and an emergency. And as Dr. Leary has shared, there's so much wisdom and insight to be gained from what it means to call a thing a thing. And so in the act of calling out racism as a threat, as a toxin, as something that we must root out, we have an opportunity to really reset the nature of our society. How is our social order called, governed, organized? As the Chief of Equity, my work is to bring an intersectional approach to thinking about the city of Boston's functions, its policies, its regulations, and to think very deeply about economic inclusion, racial justice, and health, equity, and wellness. And so there's work for the government to do here. And there's work for the government to kind of lead a larger conversation. In Boston, we recognize that that not only is racism and exclusion a part of a structural problem, but that is very personal. It's personal in terms of how people live, act, and breathe, and what their outcomes and possibilities can be. So I come to you as someone born and raised in the city of Boston. I'm from Dorchester, one of the many neighborhoods in the city. For those of you that know, Dorchester is the biggest neighborhood, the best neighborhood, the most beautiful neighborhood, the most populous, most diverse neighborhood. So we bring a lot of pride and a lot of questions for making sure that the city of Boston and its resources, its prosperity means that there's opportunity for all people in the city. So that can't just be lip service. There has to be a way to make sure that your gender, your race, your sexuality, the status of your family's holdings or assets is not predictive of your life chances or outcomes. And the fact that we know that there are discrepancies based on where you live in the city and what your zip code is and how that can affect the quality of your life, your well-being, and the outcomes of your life is unconscionable. And so when George Floyd was murdered this summer, and too many of us witnessed that, it was not only horrific, but a call to action, a call for us to think very differently about how we live and how we decide what's important to us. When the mayor called out racism, as many mayors did, it was not just to use words, but to demand that there's structural change. The mayor has also set up a different kind of structure in government by creating the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet, which I oversee, but also asking the private sector to be in partnership with us and many cities across the country to say, what more can we do to make sure that we're moving toward a moment of recovery and healing? And this moment that we're in as well, just fighting each day for a fuller reality, for a more integrated and more inclusive, more restorative experience of living in the city of Boston, means that not only are we addressing this public health crisis of COVID, but that the pandemic of racism is something that we must lean fully at strength, full shoulder to the wheel to think about and to build into a different kind of a future. And so that is where we find ourselves. And we know that we have to do it in big conversation with folks who can stand with us and to say what else is being demanded. And so I welcome not only this conversation, but I welcome the continual demands that we're hearing on the ground, folks who are organizing, folks who are agitating, all of the lessons that are being brought to us through the movement for Black lives. And what this generation is demanding is generational change and equity. And it is clear that anything less than that will not only not be satisfying, but won't be sufficient to get us to where we need to be. So much work to do, and really, really excited for the rest of the conversation that's before us this evening.
Hi, OJ. Hi, Bill. I wanted to start tonight's conversation with the two of you because both of your work as artists is so instrumental in creating the dialogues and holding the space to talk about supremacy, period, whether we're talking racism, sexism, any type of economic inequities and disparities. And I wanted to start tonight with a quote from JFK. The artist, however faithful to his personal vision of reality, becomes the last champion of the individual mind and sensibility against an intrusive society and a fictitious state. In pursuing his perceptions of reality, he must often sail against the currents of his time. This is not a popular role. If sometimes our great artists have been the most critical of our society, it is because their sensitivity and their concern for justice, which must motivate any true artist, makes him aware that our nation falls short of its highest potential. I see little of more importance to the future of our country and our civilization than full recognition of the place of the artist. So I wanted to start with asking each of you to talk about how you define your role as an artist when we're talking about injustices in this country.
This is something that changes daily. And I think it's something that depends on what I'm called to do during the day. I think being a Black queer person in itself is a revolutionary act sometimes. And sometimes that's all I can afford to do for the day. And whatever I make is something that contributes to society. But sometimes I'm called to do other things, whether it's I'm on the ground and I'm documenting photography, documenting protests, or documenting just Black life in America. It really just depends. Sorry, the quote was so long, I feel like I'm getting a little chopped up there. But I do feel that my role as an artist right now is to make sure that other voices feel like they have the space to speak. I think that's really the main thing is even if I disappeared, the work will live long enough so that people can come through, see these images, and the images will speak for themselves, but they'll also be able to see themselves in the images and speak for themselves without actually having to be there, if that makes sense.
And I hope I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yes, I will start with people who have heard me speak on many occasions that I'm going to pull this one out again, but it's useful. It comes from an era when my companion, who happens to be Jewish, Italian, because you see that the personality that you described has always been more an intersectional personality, this particular artist you're talking to, he had died. He had died in a very public way. We were some of the first people to actually go on the McLean report and talk about being HIV positive and in AIDS. And he was, as I say, Italian American. And when he died, there was a kind of a media feeding frenzy about let's talk about AIDS. What do you mean, let's talk about AIDS? We've been living this thing. But then they also wanted to know about Mr. Jones, you're so outspoken, you're so political, you're so, and the French called it, you're an artiste engagé. And this is this notion that there are actually two types of art. There is the Apollonian art, which is a true project of art, which is transcending all of the things like identity, all into dealing with big questions, life, death, and so on. And then there are those of us who are down here on the earth, engaged in the world. So Mr. Jones, could you tell us what should an artist do? And this formulation, I hope it isn't too musty. I said an artist should be the freest person in the society. Literally, sometimes running naked, and I mean naked, thumbing their nose at all received wisdom, left, right, and center. All receive wisdom. Don't tell me. However, an artist is a person. Now, this is from my social therapy days, right? These rabid left-wing Trotskyites who really were doing psychotherapy, and they were teaching things like the artist is a person, and that person has a location in the society. That person has a gender, male, female, trans. That person has a bank account. That person has a class. Now, what should an artist do? What does that artist need to do? Now that's it for me right there. Artists should be troublesome. No, and I did not start out making work that was about oppression. I spoke with the voice that I had, which was a voice informed by being a descendant of slaves. My mother being Estella Jones, who understood the world as a veil of sorrow. That's it. You don't get happiness on this planet, you get it later. Me at age 14, discovering or thinking I discovered existentialism, that there is no God, there is no purpose in human life other than what we bring to it. And then having it out with my African-American mother about that, and having it out and still finding out what it was that she had left in my heart that made me want to stand up and, as she says, bring the word. Now, bringing the word was not about Jesus. Bringing the word was something about, I think, what OJ just mentioned, something about what we're trying to talk about tonight. Is it about justice? Is it about truth? Is it about the fact that life hurts and that nobody can tell you what it really means? The Pope can't tell you what it means. Nobody can tell you. Artists are supposed to be bravely out there defining this moment by moment for us, and sometimes, as you said, Miss Osterheldt, in the face of the world. I came out of the white avant-garde. The white avant-garde didn't want to hear that I felt I'm standing on stage in Boston, and I am the only Black person in the room. And if I draw attention to that, what's his problem? We're here with you. What are you talking about? Loneliness. What are you talking about? I was trying to talk about the situation of my life. And if I tell a story about my mother or father, suddenly it becomes, oh, he's doing politics because he's talking about the Black experience. I never thought it was political. The world needed it to be political, like the world needed Bill and Arnie to represent all gay people dealing with AIDS. We were just two people in love trying to live an outrageous free life, and we got caught in something. But yours truly, what came out as HIV positive. My picture was posted all over the subways because there was nobody speaking up. I spoke up because I thought we were supposed to be honest, but that made me a spokesperson. So I hear what your question is. I understand what is supposed to be a compliment in it, but I'm just saying artists should be slipperier and harder to pin down no matter what you think is just left, right, or center.
Thank you. OJ, you've been doing such instrumental work on the front lines all summer long, and even before that. But through your work documenting protest and what you're doing, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with the history of right now?
Sure. So the history of right now has existed far longer than I've been on the ground protesting. The idea is that I'm telling the history of right now through Black voices for Black voices and eliminating the white gaze through this work. It just so happened that when protests picked back up, I was in the flurry of starting this documentary and starting a process in which I can document Black history similar to the Showa Foundation, where you would be able to go and look it up, like look up different stories and have them pre-recorded. Obviously with COVID that has changed and now it's on its way to being a documentary. But the purpose of this work is to make sure that when people look in textbooks years from now, they're seeing images taken by Black people that are of power. I think a lot of people see these past protests, these past riots, even with this idea of like looting, which I don't, that's a whole other thing, right? Like whatever. We're not actually seeing the joy and the power that is behind these protests and the organizing and the community that really comes together to make all these things happen. And that's my goal. My goal is to make sure that the community has a voice, and through hopefully the history right now, people will feel empowered to own their own history and share it with people.
And in talking about your work, you're one of my interviewees for The Beautiful Resistance, in which it's another way of removing the white gaze and celebrating Black joy and Black life through my work. And something you and I both have talked about is the community aspect of resistance and protest. Can you share with the audience the experience you had with the 6-year-old boy and kind of how protesting and taking up this space has led to a different type of thinking? Because I think that example really shows the various intersections of health and racism.
Absolutely. Actually, I'm glad you brought this story up. I hadn't even thought about sharing it because it was something that that I considered so personal, because I think when you do things within your community, it doesn't always have to be widely broadcasted. But I have been working with the same people now for 6 or 7 months, trying to make sure that the community is fed, and we're working on different ways to police within the community. I hate calling it policing, but that's the word that I have for it right now. And I was outside of my apartment building, and I saw a little boy run down the street, a small Black boy run down the street with no clothes on. And I had, somebody else's chanclas on, and saw him and started running down the street. I was like, hey, no, we're here to help you. We're here to help you. And the initial reaction was like, who do we call? I'm not going to call the police on a young Black boy. I'm not going to get the police involved and, ruin whatever's going on with his family. So instead, I was able to reach out to people that I had been organizing with that were social workers. And these social workers came to our rescue, and we all sat and we created a plan. And unfortunately, the person who worked at the CVS called the police. But because we were there as a united front, we were able to talk to the police and make sure that the mother was brought to the CVS, and we were all able to find a better care plan for this child. And I have traded my phone number with the mother, because they live down the street from me. So now if the young boy wants to go for a walk, there's somebody that she can call, and he doesn't have to just, run out of the house. I think it's ridiculous to assume that everybody has space for everything, even mothers, even fathers, right? And to look at the situation and for someone to cast judgment versus being like, no, this is actually just a community that needs help. That should be our first tactic. How do we help one another versus how do we bring in a policing system that hasn't worked for the community for hundreds of years? But without protesting and without organizing, this situation would have not happened this way.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Bill, you've been doing this work for so long, and you have just so much wisdom. And
what work is that?
Your work as an artist, your work as a choreographer, your work speaking out and truth telling.
Finding form, investigating beauty, thinking about what the nature of life is and spirituality as it intersects in our bodies.
Speak it.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing. It's very complicated. Well, I don't want to reduce it to a soundbite, what I do. Artists should be much more mysterious than that. But please, I'm being a little cantankerous.
I don't mean to reduce you to a soundbite. I just feel like to properly introduce you, I probably need 30 more minutes.
Yeah. But what was your point, though? I've been doing it a long time.
My point is, I read something you said about hope and horror in the world. And I wanted to ask you, with all that you've seen and been through, how we keep hope and why it's so important to our health and to our future.
Well, first of all, we need and be aware of any formulation that starts with "we need," because who in the hell is speaking, right? But we need to have a higher sense of purpose in our life, period, right? When I was making a piece called Still Here that was dealing with people who had been dealing with life-threatening illness, it was my way of understanding what had happened to Arnie, what had happened to a whole community of us infected with HIV, many of whom had died, and I was feeling despair. So I went to a community of experts, people who had been or were dealing with life-threatening illness, and they asked them, could you give me a guide as to what we should do? They said, one should have a sense of community. One should have a higher sense of purpose in one's life. One should cherish small things. One should live in the moment. Now, those things, they said, these were people, literally a woman who had an infant as she was dying of breast cancer. These are people who, this was a man named Floyd, who was a Black man in Columbus, Ohio. And when I asked him to talk to me about his survival techniques, he said, I like jazz. This is how people really negotiate what it means. Life is a bitch, right? And life is scary. So yes, we now, many of us, people of color, we can call it systemic racism. To me, I just think life hurts. Now, can we, and as an artist, I think I owe it to myself and to the world, can I leave yet another articulate expression of what it was like to be alive? So, OJ, what you're making sounds like an important body of work. how does beauty fit into your work, OJ? How does the idea of beauty? And do you have a sense of transcendence in work?
Thank you. That's an incredible question. Beauty is what my work is all about.
How so?
I think that everything, and I think you can understand this when it comes down to even like movement, right? The way people move in crowds, the sound of feet as they're walking through a protest, right? All of those things are a beautiful moment that can be captured both visually and audibly. And you can't separate even painful art from beauty. Right? Even the most, if you want to call it ugly, disgusting, has beauty in it. That's why you're looking at it. That's why you're processing it. And when you say transcendence, what do you mean? Like what comes afterwards? Or how?
I mean, at any one moment, our conversation is happening on several levels.
Okay.
Right now, we're already, in some ways, it's already over, and it's the memory after going to bed tonight. And we artists are constantly aware that there is no moment. And yet we only have the moment.
Yeah.
So at what level of consciousness does one enter into the act of being, and particularly in choosing the moments that you're going to make art out of? So I have great respect for you as a photographer, and seeing that you are really grappling with life. I am a person who used to be centered in my body. I was a good dancer. I was a real performer. And then you watch the body change and age over time. You watch people who started out as you did, and they're dying, and they're gone. So that gives you a kind of a distance from what is going on here, and what is important, what's really important. So we're living in a moment right now where the world needs every help it can get to deal with injustice.
Yes.
But I don't know if artists are the class of people that you should be turning that to the Supreme Court. You should be turning that to persons like Carolyn Crockett or Dr. Kimberlyn. That's the people that you do that. Artists should be, and once again, artists should be a little harder to corral. Artists are some like force in the world that we should think very highly of and be really respectful of. Did Michael Jackson deserve to be made a villain because he might have been a child abuser? I say his art and his life are different things. His art is a sacred thing. His life is a mess. And I think that we have to have that kind of respect for artists.
I so respect both of you and your time and what you have to say, but we also have to bring on the other panelists right now, if that's okay. OJ, I would like for you to finish your thought though, but I also want to invite everyone to
Sure. Just very quickly, I think something I learned a lot right then and there. It made me reframe the way I think about my own art. And I think when we look at protest work, right? I am not just a protest photographer. And this is something that I've been fighting this entire time. I'm a fabulous fine art photographer. Fabulous. I'm a wonderful fashion photographer. I'm a writer, right? But right now in this moment, I'm being framed as a protest photographer, as a historian. And those are all good things. They're respectable things. But I think when you look at the base of my work, it's so much bigger and brighter than that. And there's so much joy behind everything that I do. And without that joy, this protest work, it would not exist. It would not exist. But when I think about this idea of transcendence, and I think about like where I am in my body right now, I'm here, but my brain is 10 years away already. I'm already thinking about what this work is going to be when I'm, 50, 60, 70 years old. But I'm also thinking about what does it look like to take our future past and create a history that outlives all of us. And that's where I think that transcendence comes from. So thank you for that, because I'm going to get off of this and write. Yeah.
Can everybody turn on their cameras and join us? Amanda, you haven't had a chance to talk tonight. If you could unmute yourself and just talk a little bit about what you've seen and your perspective on racism as a public health issue.
Sure. So thank you. Thank you for having me. So the WHO did declare over a decade ago that social injustice was killing people on a massive level. And I think when we look at, what COVID is doing, as well as the unrest and the deaths of unarmed men and women in our country, we are seeing this at a very magnified level, as Dr. Leary pointed to. Now, this is where so right now I am working on a thesis on the role of arts during COVID. And I really am looking at artist activists to help us as a public health practitioner move forward and create a pathway to recovery. As a former lawyer, I don't necessarily think that we should be overly reliant on the Supreme Court or any, frankly, national or federal institution, because we're not working with, let's say, the most progressive ideals or values right now. And so I think that we really need to start looking at local levels and empowering and activating those systems to build the resilience. And I do think that artists like OJ and anyone who's willing to step up can actually create this pathway for recovery, because they're able to show us a range of expressions and also help us process what's happening to us. And it's done in a way that, I don't know, from what I'm hearing and seeing, is less threatening, frankly, given the damage that words are doing to our country and that we've seen at the highest levels of government. So I think that artists are a key pathway for our recovery, especially dealing with trauma. And I mean, even in terms of the way they construct the dialogues around the monuments. I had a very interesting conversation with Meredith Bergman in New York, who just recently built or constructed the suffragette statute. And that brought a very interesting debate within New York City, because initially Ms. Sojourner Truth was not seated at the table, despite her significant role in the movement. But what the artists or that monument did was it ignited a debate that got so many people involved and ultimately put Ms. Truth at the center where she deserved to be. So I think, you know, those kinds of exchanges are, in a way, they can not only captivate us, but they can help us process things in a less threatening way, even though they are at the heart of the issues that all of the panelists here are talking about.
Amanda, may I say, please, I don't think we would go to the Supreme Court, but I do think that artists' strong suit is not making public policy. Artists are not the people that you want to be arguing your defense in a courtroom. Artists do something else, is what I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Yes, yeah.
No. And I certainly understood that. I think what I'm saying is that perhaps we need to become less reliant on government institutions to change what's happening, especially when we're not dealing with the most progressive government institutions. I think as citizens, we really need to sort of take back control at local levels. And I would say one of the key ways to doing that, and this would be my final point, is that I would really hope everybody understands the significance of supporting the arts. As everyone probably knows, the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities is at lowest budgets. Of course, these, organizations are about to be eliminated, frankly, if the current administration persists. And I think we need to be supporting at all levels, especially local levels, our artists who are going to play, frankly, an essential role in the process of healing if we can give them space to do what they're good at.
Amanda, thank you so much for adding that last point, because I was literally about to ask you that question. So thank you. Dr. Crockett and Dr. Leary, how would you answer that question? How can we be better, more fiercely aggressive about tackling racism as a public health issue, be it through the arts or any means?
I think I would start by first offering just an appreciation to Mr. Jones and OJ for really broadening our understanding, even in this call, and certainly Mr. Jones through a lifetime of a body of work that would invite us to really question who gets to name things and define what things mean. And the work of the powerful, disruptive and creative and productive work of Mr. Jones' impact is to say, we all have the space and the power to define and call out what our reality is. The problem that we are living through is the idea of who gets to solve, who gets to name, and think has become so narrow over time, and as a condition and a manifestation certainly of white supremacy and other systems that say there is some kind of hierarchy in terms of who gets to decide, who gets to name. There's a hierarchy, a toxic order to saying, no, not you. You can't hurt, you can't solve, you can't heal. What does it mean to really open up a discussion where we all have the sovereignty and the power to name and to heal, not just government or not just corporation or not just the white person, whoever that is to me, but can we really interrogate the confines of these limited structures and understandings of who gets to feel, to express, to name, and to create? And so again, the power of the disruptive, creative minds on this call, and I'm just a policy bureaucrat, so I don't even get to be in that space, but to say that it cannot be so limited and narrow, because that is the problem. And that is actually in many ways what is death dealing in all of these situations. And so I'm just grateful to kind of be here to kind of expand the terrains and to say from where I sit in Boston City Hall and with the mayor, to say that we have to call ourselves into account. So before we put it on someone else to say, fix us, heal us, make everything nice, no. You don't get a pass. First, start with your own house, call out what you have done, take full account of your own responsibility, and make real the work of so much of even the 1960s and 70s moment, which was questioning the experts, questioning the technocrats, all that story too, and to say we all have to be in the room. And how dare you not have a room, a table, or imagination big enough to sustain and understand that we've got to recenter who can name and call and heal and have beauty, all of that. That is our birthright as people. And we have forgotten that. And it's a problem, and it is devastating and deadly.
No, an imagination big enough is exactly right. Like the idea of radical imagination and creating what isn't there, creating the spaces we don't see, doing that work, disrupting narratives. I think about that all the time as a journalist and the ways in which journalism has been harmful to society at large, and trying to create space for beauty and tell stories through the lens of beauty and joy versus suffering.
I know you do. And Jeneé, if I could just say really quickly, an appreciation for your own work, as an artist, as a journalist, as someone who through your own work is making space in the city and in other places where you have worked. It's important. And we don't have enough of that in the city of Boston. So I just want to acknowledge you as well.
Amen.
Thank you.
I think the conversation has been extraordinary, really, to be talking about pain, to be talking about living an outrageous life in outrageous times, to be saying that we have a right, everyone has a right to name their own story. I mean, these are the fundamentals of what it means to be a human being. These are the fundamentals of what's been calling the way in which we've all been touched by the multiple crises of COVID. The pain, the suffering at every turn has required an expression. And from the people who are crying at night by themselves, to those who are making art, to those who are trying something new to just move their bodies in a different way, even in the confines of their home. This is an extraordinary moment where bringing together in this conversation public policy, city policy, the arts, journalism, the future perfect, the future lives. It's really because this moment, as you said, it'll be gone in the next moment, but it is also the moment that in many ways will define for some time the experience of a great many people.
May I put an anecdote here, Jeneé, may I?
No, I actually was just going to ask you to speak, so please do.
An anecdote, and we have to be suspicious of anecdotes, but I was on Bill Maher, Mayor, right? Maher's Politically Incorrect he's he's an outrageous guy. And I was on that show, and he was trying to get my goat, since I was the artist on that, he said he was against the NEA. And he said he didn't believe that taxpayers' money should be spent toward art. He's not a stupid man, but he was saying these things. And I had to get on my soapbox saying, that artists are the earthworms of the culture. If you have a neighborhood that is ignored, and it's like a patch of land that's been polluted and stamped down, you bring these earthworms in and they break the soil up, and then things can grow. That's that's gentrification in a way, and on one kindly put. And I thought that was a good answer. I said, that's what we should be saying to all Chamber of Commerces everywhere. Support artists because they're good for your economy. I'm hearing now, and I think I'm why it's so difficult. Not only is it good for the economy, but I'm hearing it's good for mental health now, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. And that's kind of a responsibility. I think it's so much pain. Many artists feel like they are outside. They have nothing other than their blood to give. But now you're saying just by us being there, just by us making the work, that this is already helping heal. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's absolutely correct. It's how I view art. It's how I view artists as healers.
Not earthworms.
Well, I have love for earthworms, but Bill, I would love for you and OJ, before we bring Monica on and open up to Q&A, and I know you have to leave, but
I'm okay. I'm all right.
Oh, you're okay? Great.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for you and OJ to talk about I know you talked about supporting the arts, funding the arts, but right now I want to make sure we make space before we open up for Q&As for Monica to talk about the importance of protecting artists.
Sure.
And keeping them safe and keeping them here as we fight for Black lives and fight for equity, and just for all of us to be here. Artists are in danger, and I see it all the time. I've experienced it myself, and I know that people on this call have experienced it. So I just would like for you two to kind of dialogue briefly about protecting artists as they do their work, especially when they do the type of work that is considered political, that is considered outrageous and radical.
Do you mind if I start, Mr. Jones?
Please go.
So the interesting thing about listening to you speak and then listening to folks who maybe have been talking more about just like on the opposite end of things, right? Is I understand what you're saying when you're saying that a lot of this art is pain, and a lot of it is a lot of emotional labor on our behalves. And that really stresses me out, especially as a Black artist. Like, how much of my pain are you consuming for your joy? Right? I think about that all the time when I make art. Do I want to show this to the world? Because how much am I exploiting myself in order to get a little bit of coin in my pocket? How much am I exploiting other Black folks in my community to have my pockets full? That's something that I question all the time, especially in protest photography, especially when shooting. I shoot a lot of nudes of BIPOC women, right? But I also think it is an important thing to touch upon about how we have to save the mental health of people who are providing these services. And that's like a main issue, especially with everything else going on. How are we going to preserve the art, preserve ourselves, and how do those two things marry each other? Like, how have you been able to have this career that spanned your entire life, that's touched on all these different topics, and continued to maintain your own physical and mental health?
Was that to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I see we don't have much time left, but one thing is, as my mother said, keep on keeping on. Put one foot in front of the other. And as those people told me in dealing with their various life-threatening illnesses, one needs a higher sense of purpose, and one needs a community. And believe me, a lot of these were women leading these discussions. I mean, I thought this was stuff that women can teach the world. But I think, going back, Jeneé, it's very important that we don't end this without artists across the board now. And I'm not, my Black sisters and brothers and the people of color know this. But artists are suffering right now. COVID has knocked people for a loop. And artists are this shadow economy that lives on the edge. It's kind of romantic, right? The starving artists. Well, they really are starving now. So yes, we want to protect people who are making politically incendiary work. That's true. Let's go for it. But what about the person who is writing? What about this is an odd one. What about the Emily Dickinsons right now? I don't know if she's very popular right now, but she's a great poet who never got acknowledged in her life at all, but she was an upper class woman, right? What about people who have something that profound to say that's not going to grab anyone's headlines, but that has real power and value? Can we protect them? Yeah, so let's say to hell no to the gulag where they put us. We will see after the election how many on this call get invited to the gulag, but there's also who really cares about that delicate thing, which is an evidence of human consciousness that artists can be, no matter what their color, no matter what their gender. That's my belief in art. It's a kind of a religious experience.
Thank you so much, all of you. I really wish that this could be a longer call because I feel like there's so much more each of you have to offer us, and I just hate even to cut this short. We have to bring Monica back on now, the fabulous Monica, to open up to Q&A so we can get some questions from that.
Thank you. And thank you all for your words. And actually, some of the questions that the audience has posted have been addressed. Thinking a lot about the health and well-being of artists that has come up, which I think you did touch upon. And I know we're running out of time, so I do wonder if one of the questions that was asked was also about what what artworks you are turning to for inspiration or solace right now.
For solace, you say?
That was the question.
A lot of trash TV. I mean, that's not allowed, right?
My husband's a musician, so we have a lot of jazz in our house because he plays now on something called Jam Kazam, which I guess is Zoom for musicians.
Jam Kazam?
Jam Kazam.
I have to remember that, yeah.
Yeah. I think as someone who I'm an audience member, that's what I am. But to be able to look at beautiful things made by beautiful people, even for a few moments at a time, can really be such a centering experience. And to also be provoked by images, provoked really to even anger and more than that, has also, I think it lifts us out of our numbness, which is a part of what we're all struggling, I think, as part of the compounded stress that we're under right now. So that's what I'd say in response to that question.
But if anybody wants a good time, if you have Spotify, I would go to Spotify and ask for Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong and just take 2 hours out of your life and a glass of wine, and you will know what great artistry can do. That's one thing.
Can I take a shot of Henny instead?
Oh, sorry about that. Was that an anti-alcohol? Oh, did you say Henny?
Yeah.
Oh, tequila is my drink. I'm being sophisticated.
Okay, there we go. OJ's work is a work that I'm turning to. Christina Martinez on Instagram, she's so trill. Her work is a work I'm turning to. Flower stands. This is like the last week for flower farms, but that's been a thing that I've turned to, and I look at that as art. Pro Black in Boston is another artist I've been turning to. And then the project I'm working on, Beautiful Resistance, is kind of what's been my outlet, talking to Black people about their joy and about the things that give them joy has given me joy. And I've been listening to a lot of Kendrick Lamar and Jeneé and occasionally Kool and the Gang because Summer Madness just, I mean.
How many people actually dance to release stress? I mean, I don't mean like ballet. I mean, who gets down as, look at this. This is a hip group. Yes.
My favorite post-shower activity. I put on my favorite album, and sometimes it's wine, sometimes it's a big jug of water because I don't be hydrating during the day. And you know, you gotta shake it out, especially when you're
with that beautiful skin. With that skin you've got to hydrate.
Oh, thank you. I'm trying to keep it up, trying to look like you, you know.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, but yes, dance as a form of expression when I'm sad, when I'm angry, when I'm joyous, all the time. You know, yeah, I hear you. I understand why you do what you do.
Yeah, you all are. This is real. My nephew, Lance Theodore Briggs. We did this piece in ICA. Handsome, beautiful young boy, San Francisco Ballet, black boy, and he ran into this life. He ran into the life that we all know. He was an at-risk kid. He is now fighting for his life in a hospital in Tampa. He has lost the use of his legs. He's trying to get his life together, and he says, "It's about art, Uncle. I got to tell my story. I want other LGBT people to know what I went through so they don't have to do this." So that's him calling right now, and he's back in the hospital again. So I am going to embrace you all and say this is so real. You know, thank you for having me. And OJ, I think I saw your photo of yourself, and I can see who you are. And everybody, you moved me so much. And thank you, Amanda, for keeping us real. But don't forget art for art's sake now, love. Don't forget, there's got to be a room for it.
I'll send you my other stuff too. So
please do. And
yeah,
Jeneé, you're as eloquent as you are beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you all. Goodbye now.
You.
I'm going to check out. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
And thank you everyone for this conversation. Thank you, Jeneé, for being our moderator.
Thank you.